Captain Kim Jin-woo gripped the metal railing of his ship's bridge, his knuckles white with tension. Through the massive viewing window, he watched something that made his stomach drop. The darkness of space was suddenly filled with light as hundreds of golden warships appeared out of nowhere, their hulls gleaming like polished mirrors under the distant stars. These weren't just any ships. This was the Zephyrian Empire's Grand Fleet, the most feared military force in the galaxy. Each vessel was a masterpiece of engineering, smooth and perfect, with weapons that could turn entire planets into glass. They moved in perfect formation. Like a deadly dance choreographed by gods of war, Jin-woo looked down at his own ship, the Defiant, and almost laughed at the contrast. Where the Empire's vessels were beautiful, his ship looked like it had been built in a junkyard. Patches of different colored metal covered the hull, held together with welding that looked rough and desperate. Cables and pipes ran along the outside where they should have been hidden inside. It was a ship that screamed poverty and desperation to anyone who saw it. The truth was, that's exactly what Earth wanted everyone to think. Admiral Vextar's voice suddenly filled the bridge, coming through every communication channel at once. The alien's words were meant for the entire galaxy to hear, broadcast across thousands of worlds and millions of screens. His tone was dripping with contempt and amusement. "Look at this pathetic display," the Admiral's voice boomed. "This is what humanity calls a warship? This pile of scrap metal and broken dreams? They dare to sail among the stars with such primitive garbage." Jin-woo watched his crew's faces grow tense. Lieutenant Park Soo-min sat at her station, monitoring the flood of communications coming from across the galaxy. Her jaw was clenched so tight he could see the muscles working. She was a proud woman, a brilliant engineer who had helped design much of their ship's hidden systems. "They're calling us savages," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the ship's systems. "Every news channel, every social network, every cantina from here to the galactic core, they're all laughing at us." The mockery was spreading like wildfire. On 1,000 different worlds, beings of every species imaginable were sharing videos of the encounter. The Defiant became an instant meme, a symbol of human stupidity and technological backwardness. Comedy shows made jokes about Earth's tin. Navy military analysts dismissed humanity as a species that would never pose a threat to anyone. Children on Imperial worlds, already playing games where they pretended to be mighty Zephyrian warriors, defeating the silly humans with their broken ships. The humiliation was complete and total, exactly as Admiral Vextar had planned. But Captain Jin-woo wasn't angry. Instead, a slow smile spread across his face. He knew something that the entire galaxy didn't. This wasn't a failure at all. It was the most successful mission in human history. The Empire had no idea what they were really looking at. They saw a desperate species trying to copy technology they didn't understand. They saw weakness, incompetence, and failure. They saw exactly what Earth wanted them to see. The Defiant wasn't built to look impressive, it was built to look harmless. The Defiant floated in space like a wounded animal, its engines barely humming with power. To the Zephyrian fleet surrounding them, it looked like the human ship was completely helpless, maybe even broken. The golden warships maintained their perfect circular formation, their weapons trained on the pathetic Earth vessel at the center. On the bridge of the Imperial flagship, Admiral Vextar's officers were having the time of their lives. They competed with each other to come up with the most creative insults about human technology. One officer joked that the Defiant looked like it had been assembled by blind children using kitchen utensils. Another laughed that humans probably used rubber bands to hold their engines together. The laughter echoed through the Imperial Command Center as more officers joined in. They pointed at their screens showing detailed scans of the human ships. Exterior, every patch, every mismatched panel, every crude welding job was highlighted and mocked. To them, it was proof that humans were nothing more than primitive scavengers, trying to play with technology far beyond their understanding. But down in the lower decks of the Defiant, something very different was happening. Chief Engineer Lee, Dong-Yoon crouched in a cramped maintenance tunnel, surrounded by instruments that definitely weren't standard human technology. His fingers flew over controls that looked like they belonged on a dozen different alien ships, because that's exactly what they were. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he worked. Every second counted. While the Empire's officers were busy laughing at his ship's appearance, his scanners were drinking in every detail of their vessels. Power signatures that revealed how much energy each ship could generate, weapon configurations that showed exactly how their guns worked, shield frequencies that could be the key to penetrating their defenses. All of this information was being quietly transmitted back to Earth through quantum communication channels so advanced that the Empire didn't even know they existed. The same species that was being mocked for building scrap heaps had actually mastered communication. Technology that could instantly send data across the galaxy without being detected. Up on the bridge, Commander Han Jisoo watched her tactical displays. With growing amazement, she had spent years studying Imperial military tactics, but seeing their fleet in action was like looking at a museum exhibit. "Captain," she said quietly, "they're using the exact same attack formations that they used 300 years ago. Nothing has changed." It was true. The Zephyrian Empire had become so dominant, so confident in their superiority, that they had stopped innovating. Why improve when you're already perfect? Why adapt when every enemy fell before your golden ships? Their military doctrine had become frozen in time, as rigid and unchanging as their beautiful formations. The Imperial fleet had conquered dozens of worlds using these same strategies. They would arrive in perfect formation, display their overwhelming power, demand surrender, and then systematically destroy any resistance. It worked every time because their ships were genuinely superior to anything their enemies could field. But Captain Jinwoo was beginning to understand something important. The Empire's ships weren't just weapons of war, they were works of art. Every curve was perfect. Every surface polished to mirror brightness. They were built to inspire fear and awe, to make enemies surrender just by looking at them. Art, however, was often impractical. A sculpture might be beautiful, but it wouldn't be very useful in a fight. Back on Earth, shipyards had become a hive of frantic activity. Day and night, workers crawled over massive construction frames, welding and hammering and cursing as they built what looked like the most desperate fleet in galactic history. Sparks flew in the darkness as massive cranes lifted sections of hull that didn't match, painted in different colors and made from obviously different materials. To anyone watching from the outside, it looked like humanity was throwing together whatever they could find. Old mining equipment was being welded onto military hulls. Cargo ship engines were being fitted into what were supposed to be warships. The entire construction effort looked chaotic, desperate, and doomed to failure. But that was exactly the point. Every single worker knew the real plan, hidden beneath the messy patchwork exteriors. Each ship contained technology that would have amazed the galaxy's greatest engineers. The lessons learned from the Defiance encounter with the Empire had been carefully studied and improved upon. What looked like crude modifications were actually sophisticated systems disguised to look primitive. The intelligence. Reports flowing back to the Zephyrian Empire painted exactly the picture Admiral Vexstar wanted to see. His spies, scattered across human space, sent back images of the construction efforts with detailed analysis. Every report confirmed what the Admiral already believed about human stupidity. "Look at this pathetic display," Vexstar announced to his war council. Projecting holographic images of the human shipyards, the alien officers gathered around the table laughed as they saw humans struggling to attach what appeared to be kitchen appliances to their warships. "They're building more scrap heaps, even more pitiful than the first one." One of his advisors pointed at a particularly ugly ship that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts found in a junkyard. "Our intelligence suggests they're trying to copy our weapon systems, but they clearly don't understand how they work. Look at these crude attempts at energy cannons." The War Council erupted in laughter. To them, it was obvious that humans were like children playing with toys they didn't understand. The Empire's technology was so advanced, so perfect, that any attempt to copy it would result in these laughable failures. Admiral Vexstar made his decision with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. He would bring the Empire's greatest armada to finish off humanity once and for all. 300 warships, each one a masterpiece of engineering, would be more than enough to crush Earth's pathetic fleet. The golden ships began gathering at the Empire's staging areas, their hulls gleaming like captured stars. Victory parades were already being planned on the Imperial capital world. Musicians were composing songs about the glorious conquest. Children were being taught about the brave admiral who would finally put the upstart humans in their place. Captain Choi Min-ho stood on the bridge of his vessel, the Resilience, watching the final preparations. His ship looked like it had been built in someone's garage, with mismatched panels and exposed wiring running along the hull. But appearances could be deceiving. Like all the other human captains, Min-ho knew what was really hidden beneath his ship's rough exterior, systems that could adapt and learn, weapons that could change their properties mid-battle, defenses that would have seemed impossible to the Empire's rigid way of thinking. The trap was set. The Empire's arrogance had blinded them to the truth. Just as humanity had hoped, the moment of truth came near a small mining colony called Kepler-4 for it to be. It was just another ordinary rock floating in space, the kind of place where humans dug up minerals and tried to make a living on the edge of civilized space. But today, it would become the site of the first real battle between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. The Empire's advanced ships arrived first, their golden hulls catching the light from the system's star. These weren't even the main fleet, just a small group of scouts meant to clear the way for Admiral Vextar's massive armada. To them, it should have been a simple job. Find the human ships, destroy them, and move on. Captain Song Hyeri waited in her command chair, watching the enemy vessels approach on her tactical display. Her ship looked like a flying junkyard, with patches of different colored metal and exposed conduits running along the hull. The Empire's ships looked like they had been crafted by master artists, smooth and perfect and deadly. The Zephyrian commander didn't even bother with warnings or demands for surrender. Why waste time talking to primitives? His ships opened fire immediately, their plasma cannons lighting up the darkness with streams of superheated energy. These were the same weapons that had turned entire civilizations to ash. Weapons that had never failed to destroy whatever they hit. The plasma beams struck Song Hyeri's ship dead center, and for a moment, it seemed like the battle was over before it had even begun. But then something impossible happened. Instead of exploding into a cloud of debris, the human ship's hull began to shimmer and change. The metal itself seemed to flow like liquid, rearranging its molecular structure right before their eyes. Where the plasma had struck, the armor became denser, more resistant. The ship was literally evolving to counter the attack. What in the void is happening? What? The Zephyrian commander screamed at his tactical officer. What? His scanners were showing readings that made no sense. The human ship should have been destroyed, but instead, it was adapting. Back on the Imperial flagship, Admiral Vextar watched the battle feeds with growing disbelief. His voice came out as barely a whisper. Impossible. The weapons that had conquered 100 worlds were bouncing off what should have been inferior human armor. Song Hyeri smiled as she watched her ship's defenses work exactly as designed. Months of careful engineering had gone into this moment. Her armor wasn't just metal, it was a living system that could change its properties in real time. Learning from each attack and becoming stronger, the Empire's biggest mistake had been their success. For centuries, they had used the same weapons, the same tactics, the same approach to warfare. Why change what worked? But that consistency had become a weakness. Their plasma cannons all worked the same way, with the same energy signatures and the same attack patterns. Lieutenant. Commander Yang Taemin coordinated the defense from his engineering station, his fingers flying over controls that looked like they belonged on a dozen different alien ships, because they did. Humanity had taken the best ideas from every species they had encountered and combined them into something new. Captain, he reported with barely contained excitement, their weapons are too predictable. Our adaptive systems are learning their patterns faster than they can adjust their targeting. We're actually getting stronger with each hit. The human ships began to fight back, their own weapons systems revealing capabilities that the Empire had never imagined. These weren't copies of Imperial technology. They were something entirely new. hybrid systems that combined the best elements from dozens of different civilizations. For the first time in centuries, Imperial forces found themselves outmatched. And forced to retreat, Admiral Vexstar stood in his command chamber, his clawed hands gripping the tactical display as he watched the defeat of his advanced forces. The golden hologram showed his retreating ships, their perfect hulls scarred and smoking. For the first time in his military career, he had been forced to call a retreat. But Vexstar was no fool. He had risen to his position through cunning as much as strength. If the humans had surprised him once, it wouldn't happen again. He activated the fleet-wide communication system, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. All ships assume formation Alpha Prime, he ordered. Capital ships to the center, fighter squadrons in supporting positions. We will show these primitives the true might of Imperial doctrine. The response was immediate and beautiful to watch. 300 golden warships moved like dancers in a cosmic ballet, each one taking its precise position in the formation that had conquered entire star systems. The massive capital ships formed a solid wall of firepower. Smaller vessels arranged themselves in perfect, geometric patterns around them. This was the formation that had broken the Alcaran defense fleet. This was the arrangement that had reduced the Torvan rebellion to ash. It was tested, proven, absolutely devastating when properly executed. Captain Kim Jin-woo watched the Imperial fleet reorganize from the bridge of the Defiant. He had spent countless hours studying recordings of this exact formation, analyzing its strengths and weaknesses. The Empire's military doctrine was impressive, but it was also predictable. All ships execute Pattern 7, he commanded over the quantum communication network. Remember, we are not fighting their war. We are fighting our own. What happened next would have horrified any traditional military strategist. Instead of forming their own battle line to match the Empire's formation, the human fleet simply scattered. Ships that had been flying together suddenly broke apart, spreading out across the battlefield like seeds thrown into the wind. To Admiral Vexstar, it looked like complete chaos. Where he expected to face an organized enemy fleet, he instead saw dozens of small groups flying in apparently random directions. Some ships flew alone, others in pairs or small clusters. There was no apparent pattern, no clear command structure. "They're running away," one of his officers reported with satisfaction. "The cowards are abandoning their formation." Vexstar was beginning to suspect something else was happening. The human ships weren't fleeing, they were moving with purpose. Even if that purpose wasn't immediately clear, Commander Park Young-ho led his squadron of converted mining ships against the Imperial left flank. These weren't even proper warships. They were industrial vessels that had been hastily modified with whatever weapons the humans could salvage or build. By all rights, they should have been destroyed instantly by the Empire's disciplined fighter squadrons. Instead, something remarkable happened. The mining ship's crude, improvised weapons began tearing through Imperial shields like they were made of paper. These weren't standard energy weapons or conventional missiles. They were hybrid systems that combined salvaged alien technology in ways that no single species had ever imagined. One weapon combined Zephyrian plasma technology with cordon gravity manipulation and human targeting systems. Another used Vexian shield disruptors powered by human fusion cores and guided by Altarian navigation computers. Each weapon was unique, unpredictable, and deadly. The rigid Imperial formation began to buckle under the chaotic human assault. Every time the Zephyrian forces adapted to counter one type of attack, the humans would shift to something completely different. It was like fighting smoke. Every time you thought you had grasped it, it slipped away and reformed somewhere else. "Fight like barbarians," complained one of Vexstar's subordinates.
After watching in frustration as another
Imperial squadron was forced to retreat, but the Admiral was beginning to understand a disturbing truth. What looked like chaos was actually sophisticated coordination, disguised as randomness. Throughout the chaotic battle, one human ship had been quietly drifting at the edge of the combat zone, seemingly forgotten by both sides. The Defiant looked like it had taken heavy damage in the early fighting, with smoke trailing from its patched hull and its engines flickering weakly. To Admiral Vexstar, it was just another piece of human junk that would be cleaned up after the real threats were dealt with. The Imperial Admiral was completely focused on the swarms of human vessels that continued to dart around his formations like angry insects. Every time his gunners thought they had a clear shot, the enemy ships would scatter and regroup somewhere else. It was frustrating, but Vexstar was confident that his superior firepower would eventually wear them down. He never even glanced at the Defiant, drifting harmlessly in the background. Captain Kim Jinwoo sat in his command chair, watching the battle unfold exactly as he had planned. His ship's apparent damage was completely fake. Hidden projectors created the illusion of smoke and sparks. While his engines operated on minimal power to sell the deception, he needed the Empire to ignore him, to focus entirely on the other human ships. Captain, his tactical officer whispered, "The Imperial fleet is fully committed. All their reserves are engaged." Jinwoo nodded slowly. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the culmination of months of careful planning. The Empire's arrogance had led them exactly where he wanted them, completely focused on the obvious threat while ignoring the real danger. "Lieutenant Shin Menji," he called to his communications officer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you ready?" The young woman's hands hovered over her console, trembling slightly with anticipation. She had spent months preparing for this moment, studying, captured Imperial communication protocols, and reverse engineering their command systems. "Ready, Captain?" "Now," Jinwoo said simply. Minji's fingers flew across her controls, activating systems that had been hidden deep within the Defiant's hull. The ship's true purpose was finally revealed, not as a warship, but as the most sophisticated electronic warfare platform humanity had ever built. Every piece of salvaged alien technology, every seemingly random modification, has been carefully designed for this single moment. A signal burst from the Defiant, invisible to the naked eye, but devastating in its effect. It penetrated the Zephyrian command network like a virus, spreading through their communication systems faster than their security. Protocols could respond. The Empire's perfect coordination had always been their greatest strength. Every ship in their fleet was connected to a central command network, allowing them to move and fight as one unified force. Orders flowed from the flagship to every vessel instantly, creating the beautiful formations that had conquered worlds. But now, that same network became their greatest weakness. Chaos erupted within the Imperial ranks as ships began receiving contradictory orders. One squadron was told to attack the human left flank, while simultaneously being ordered to defend the right. Fighter pilots heard commands to engage enemy ships that their sensors couldn't even detect. Capital ships received targeting data that directed their guns at their own support vessels. "What's happening?" screamed one of Vexstar's officers as his tactical display solved into a maze of conflicting information. The Admiral watched in growing horror as his golden armada began to tear itself apart. Ships that had fought together for decades suddenly opened fire on each other, their weapons guided by corrupted targeting systems. The perfect formations that had taken centuries to develop collapsed into chaos as vessels collided or fled in random directions. "The humans," Vexstar whispered, finally understanding the trap he had walked into. They'd been planning this for months. The species he had dismissed as primitive had turned his own arrogance into a weapon against him. Well, the Imperial fleet tore itself apart in confusion. Something far more dangerous was preparing to strike. Deep in the engineering sections of human ships scattered across the battlefield, Commander Nasungmin was coordinating the most ambitious plan in human history. For years, he had been studying fragments of technology salvaged from dozens of different alien civilizations, piecing together knowledge that no single species had ever possessed. The Cordon had mastered gravity manipulation, but only for their ships. The Vexians could predict solar activity, but couldn't control it. The Altarians understood stellar physics, but lacked the tools to influence stars. Humanity had learned from them all, combining their knowledge into something that should have been impossible. "All ships begin Phase 7. Sungmin transmitted across the quantum network. Execute gravitational alignment in 30 seconds. Across the battlefield, human vessels that had seemed to be fighting randomly suddenly revealed their true purpose. Each ship began generating powerful gravitational fields, invisible forces that reached out across space like invisible hands. To the confused Imperial forces, it looked like the humans were retreating. Pulling back from the battle, Admiral Vextar, desperate to restore some kind of order to his shattered fleet, saw what he thought was his chance. "All ships, pursue the enemy," he commanded. The surviving Zephyrian vessels, still struggling with corrupted communication systems, began to chase the retreating humans. They moved in a ragged formation, no longer the perfect golden wall that had entered the battle. Many ships had been damaged by friendly fire, their hulls scarred, and their crews demoralized, but they were still dangerous, still powerful enough to destroy Earth's fleet if they could bring their weapons to bear. Vextar pushed his engines to full power, leading the charge toward what he thought was a retreating enemy. He was flying directly into the most sophisticated trap ever devised by any species in the galaxy. The human ships weren't retreating at all. They were moving with precise coordination, their gravitational fields working together to create something unprecedented. Like a massive invisible net, they were herding the Imperial fleet toward a specific point in space, directly toward the system's star. "Gravitational alignment achieved," reported one of Sung Min's technicians. "All ships reporting ready for stellar manipulation." What happened next had never been attempted in the history of galactic warfare. The combined gravitational fields of the human fleet reached out across millions of miles of space, touching the surface of the star itself. They triggered something that had been building for weeks. Solar flare that had been carefully calculated and precisely timed. But this wasn't just any solar flare. The gravitational manipulation focused and directed the stellar eruption like a weapon, turning the star itself into humanity's gun. A massive wave of superheated plasma erupted from the sun's surface. Racing toward the Imperial fleet at incredible speed, the golden ships, built to look beautiful and intimidating, had never been designed for extreme conditions. They were parade vessels as much as warships, crafted to inspire awe rather than survive stellar fury. As the wave of starfire reached them, their perfect hulls began to buckle and melt. Impossible. Admiral Vextar screamed as his flagship's shields failed completely. Control room filled with sparks and smoke as systems overloaded. No species has ever weaponized a star. Captain O'Yemen's voice came through the communication channels, calm and deadly serious. "No single species," he corrected. "But we learned from all of them." The Imperial Admiral realized the horrible truth. Humanity hadn't just copied alien technology. They had combined it in ways that its creators never imagined possible. The wave of stellar fire hit the Imperial fleet like the wrath of an angry god. In seconds, ships that had taken decades to build were reduced to glowing metal slag. The beautiful golden hulls that had been polished to mirror perfection simply melted away under the incredible heat. 2/3 of the Empire's greatest armada was consumed in minutes. Their crews vaporized before they could even scream. Admiral Vextar watched in horror from his command bridge as ship after ship disappeared in brilliant flashes of light. These weren't just vessels, they were symbols of Imperial power, each one representing decades of engineering excellence and military tradition. The flagship Golden Talon exploded in a cascade of sparks. The heavy cruiser Empire's fury simply melted like a candle in a furnace. The surviving Imperial ships, their perfect formation shattered, and their command structure in complete chaos, did the only thing they could do. They ran. Engines screaming with emergency power, they scattered in every direction, desperate to escape the stellar hellfire that had consumed their fleetmates. But humanity had planned for this moment too. The humans had studied Imperial tactics for months, learning not just how they fought, but how they thought. Every possible escape route had been anticipated. Every retreat path carefully mapped. Captain Quan Sora had positioned her task force at the primary jump point, the main hyperspace corridor that the Empire used to enter and exit the system. Her ships looked like floating junkyards, but they carried weapons that could tear through Imperial shields like paper. "No one leaves," she announced over the communication channels. "This ends here." Meanwhile, Captain Li Jihun's vessels had quietly moved to block the secondary escape route, a narrow corridor between two asteroid fields that military strategists often used for emergency retreats. His ships were outnumbered, but they had surprise on their side and weapons that the Empire couldn't understand. The surviving Imperial forces found themselves trapped in a web of human ships that seemed to anticipate their every move. Every time they tried to break out in one direction, Earth vessels appeared to block their path. Every tactical decision they made had already been predicted and countered. Admiral Vextar's flagship was burning now, plasma storms from the stellar weapon ravaging its hull. The being who had mocked humanity's scrap heap sat in his command chair, watching his perfect armada reduced to glowing debris floating in space. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was being defeated by the very species he had dismissed as primitive. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. Lieutenant Park Soo-min monitored the communication networks from her station on the Defiant, watching as the universe's perception of humanity transformed in real time. The same news channels that had mocked Earth's tin can navy just days before were now broadcasting in stunned silence. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had laughed at human incompetence now watched in amazement as the mighty Zephyrian Empire was humbled. The species that had been dismissed as scavengers and primitives had just accomplished something that no other civilization in galactic history had ever achieved. They had turned a star into a weapon. The last Imperial ships faced an impossible choice. They could surrender and face the humiliation of defeat, or they could continue fighting and face certain destruction. One by one, they powered down their weapons and transmitted surrender signals. The age of Zephyrian dominance was over, ended. Not by another empire, but by the species they had underestimated most. Captain Kim Gin-woo stood on the bridge of the Defiant, looking out at a scene that would be remembered for generations. The space around them was filled with the twisted remains of what had once been the most feared fleet in the galaxy. Chunks of golden metal drifted past the viewports, still glowing from the stellar fire that had consumed them. The mighty Zephyrian Empire's armada had been reduced to nothing more than expensive scrap metal floating in the void. But the Defiant no longer looked like a desperate scrap heap. With the battle won, the ship's true nature was finally revealed. Hidden panels slid back to expose sophisticated sensor arrays. Fake damage flickered away as holographic projectors shut down. The patchwork hull that had been designed to look pathetic now gleamed with the confident pride of victory. This wasn't just a single ship anymore. It was the flagship of humanity's first true interstellar fleet, the vessel that had been mocked. Across the galaxy was now the command center of the most innovative military force anyone had ever seen. Across the galaxy, the news was spreading faster than light itself. On worlds that had laughed at human incompetence just days before, beings now watched their screens in stunned silence. The impossible had happened. The species that everyone had dismissed as primitive had just defeated the most powerful empire in known space. But as the reports came in, something remarkable began to happen. Other civilizations started to understand what they had really witnessed. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a demonstration of something far more important. Earth's greatest strength wasn't their technology. It was their ability to adapt, to improvise, to take the discarded ideas of others and turn them into something revolutionary. Commander Han Jisu monitored the communication arrays, watching as message after message flooded in from across the galaxy. "Captain," she reported with barely concealed excitement, "we're receiving formal requests for alliance from 17 different civilizations. The Cordon Collective wants to share their gravity technology. The Vexians are offering to teach us advanced stellar prediction. They all want to learn from us." It was incredible. Species that had ignored humanity for centuries were now begging for the chance to work together. The same beings who had mocked Earth's scrap heap ships were now desperate to understand how humans had combined their technologies in ways they had never imagined. The galaxy was changing. The Empire's age of arrogance was ending, replaced by something new, humanity's age of innovation. The species that had been ridiculed for building ships from salvaged parts had proven something profound. Sometimes the greatest victories didn't come from perfection or overwhelming power. They came from the courage to take broken pieces and make something greater than the sum of its parts. As the Defiant began its journey home to Earth, Captain Jinwoo allowed himself a small smile. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. Humanity had shown the galaxy that underestimating them was a dangerous mistake. Now they would have to prove that they could use their newfound respect responsibly. The stars ahead looked different now. Where once they had seemed cold and hostile, filled with civilizations that looked down on humanity, now they seemed full of possibility. The galaxy would never underestimate the human race again. The age of humanity had begun.